Israel vowed to eliminate Hamas as part of their 15-month brutal assault on the Palestinian territory. And British leaders, both Labour and Conservative, have asserted Israel's right to defend itself in this way.
We absolutely support Israel's right to defend itself.
Israel has the right to defend herself.
However, footage from the recent handovers of Israeli captives showed that Hamas and other Palestinian resistance groups appear to have not been defeated. With me to talk about this is Joe Glenton, a former British soldier, now a journalist and writer, and we're going to be analysing some of the videos of these handovers to find out what military capabilities these armed groups have, the types of weapons, the size of the personnel. Joe, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
Joe, we've both analysed the videos of these hostage handovers. Were you surprised by what you saw?
I was surprised at how brazen the displays were, how open it was, how many people attended, the size, the scale of these events. I mean, obviously there is Hamas and the various other groups who've captured people who'd want to use that for their own propaganda purposes, but I was surprised at how open they were. Because this is a relatively small area which has top cover, it has drones, there's air power, part of it is occupied, it's been very badly damaged. And I was surprised at the number and the state of the forces involved, especially given Israel's stated aim at the start. They were going to flatten Gaza, destroy Hamas, all the various things they said about their aims there. So I was surprised at how open these events are.
And how clean the cars are, right? Look at that.
Yeah, it's hard to know the state of Hamas. There's always an element of theatre in these things. They're doing this for an audience, locally and globally, and for the other sides. But it is distinct that, the vehicles are clean, they're in good order, the uniforms are in good order, their weapons are clean. That's all very important. You can see people walking around with cameras. There's obviously a substantial media operation taking place.
So Joe, we've got this video. We can see from their headbands that it's the Al-Qassam Brigades, which is the military wing of Hamas. What sort of weapons have they got?
So both of these guys seem to be using a Tavor, which is an Israeli rifle. It's 5.56mm. It's a standard assault rifle, really, in terms of its platform. It's got that bullpup design, which the British SA-80 has as well. The magazine is behind the handle, and it's supposed to make it easier to wield in built-up areas, rubble and buildings and stuff like that. It's part of the theory behind it. Obviously, Israel has built a lot of its fighting capacity around urban warfare because it's an occupying force, and it's fighting in that kind of terrain as well. I suppose it's distinctive that one of these guys, under his weapon system, has an M203 grenade launcher, which again you'll find across American and British weapons, but it's just an attachment which will fire a 40mm grenade. They do different kinds of things. But yeah, what's distinct here is that they appear to be using Israeli weapons, which I would assume have been captured at some point.
Do you think that they're actively using these weapons? They have been against Israel. When do you think they would have picked these up?
It's hard to say. I would suggest these things are not generally, there are severe penalties for dropping your weapon on the battlefield, and you'll be penalised for that as a soldier. It's quite possible they were picked up during the raids on the 7th. I suppose there is a question about stockpiles of ammunition. Obviously, this is a different kind of ammunition, a smaller round to the AK-47. AK-47 is a 7.62, which is a bigger, heavier round, and these use 5.56mm, which is standard across NATO. But as to whether they're being used, it really depends on what ammunition stocks are like and if they have access to 5.56mm bullets.
Again, this is Al-Qassam, and what we can see here is two different types of uniform. We've got guys in a darker uniform, and then taking up the rear in this procession is a more lighter khaki. What does this look like to you, Joe?
Well, it's difficult to know if the different colours of uniform signify different groups, different units, or we can see guys who are dressed in black as well, alongside the various kind of shades of digicam. But they all seem to be in a column together, again, with various weapons. I think there was an M16 type weapon popped up, one of the guys at the front.
Where are M16s generally from?
M16 is, I believe, a Canadian design originally, but they're used across NATO, the Americans particularly, and also the Israelis again. But it's a distinct weapon and a different caliber from what we can see, again, is the ubiquitous AK-47 floating around. And certainly the majority of weapons are the AKs, but there was at least one guy there with a AR-15 type, M4 type rifle as well.
This footage is from the 15th of February handover. Shortly after this, Israel kind of issued a statement saying that they need to stop these kind of displays of the weapons and the hostages, and they said it was disrespectful. I mean, what can we see here in this photo, Joe?
Well, I think this one's quite distinct. You see the guy in the centre he's carrying the SMG, the shorter version of the Tavor rifle. You can see the barrels cut down, as it were. But what's also distinct is that he's wearing what appears to be Israeli military fatigues and this Israeli army helmet cover, which has two. It's very distinct. This big kind of baggy, almost hat, and it has two distinct roles. One of them is to break up the shape of the human body from a distance, so the head and the shoulders aren't as visible. But it's also to take the shine off a helmet underneath their kind of plasticky. But it's interesting. I mean, again, it's part of these shows of force which you see. You'll remember, if you look at old footage of the IRA, they would do it, various other armed groups around the world. But also states have big processions of military hardware as well. And it's just like displaying that they are credible and active. And it's part of, obviously they have sophisticated propaganda planning and stuff like that. And so this is part of that as well. But it's interesting that both these guys in the pictures appear to be carrying Israeli weapons and wearing Israeli uniform.
With a kafir?
With a kafir, yeah.
So how are you reading into this? Are they just saying, we're still here, basically?
I would suggest that's probably what they're trying to communicate. This is part of it. I mean, all states and all armed groups use propaganda in different ways, and they're very sophisticated about it increasingly. And I would suggest this is an example of that. He's got his V for victory fingers up. So yeah, I think it's part of that. It's a show of force, effectively. We've
got a clip where there's a guy with a type of rifle. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about that. But there's an insignia attached to the magazine where it's got, October 7th on it, and the name, we think, of an Israeli base where this rifle was taken from.
He's carrying an LMG, a Negev LMG. So the LMG is normally in the British Army you'd have an 8-man section, and maybe one of those guys would have a slightly heavier weapon, basically, with a drum magazine which contains many more rounds than the standard 30. So this is a light machine gun, an LMG of Israeli design. You can see there's a serial number on the side of it as well, and you can see some of the furniture. It's got a sight, it's got a particular kind of extendable stock. But what's also distinct is this sticker, which appears to have been attached to the magazine, which seems to be referring to, in the translation we've attempted, to an Israeli base which was raided on the 7th, as I understand it. So it's possible that it was taken from an armory, taken from a military base, picked up off the ground from someone who dropped it, perhaps was killed. We don't know, but it's clearly an Israeli weapon.
And you can even see an Al-Qassam Brigade sticker that they've put on it to really mark it. Yeah. And we talked about some of the groups. I mean, we can see from this footage, we've got the Al-Aqsa Master Brigades there, which is Fatah, which is the group in control in the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. We've got the Al-Quds Brigades, which is Palestinian Jihad. They kind of work with Hamas. It's another Islamist organization. We've got the Ali Abu Mustafa Brigades, which is part of the PFLP, a left-wing organization. They've got another armed group, the PFLP, and there's another leftist militia from the DFLP, which is an offshoot of the PFLP. So this idea that it's Israel versus Hamas is just completely wrong.
It's a mistake, I think, to identify, try and identify like a clear block, and that's kind of encapsulated in the Israel-Hamas war, because actually there's a kind of plurality of groups, as is often the case, and the reasons they sheer off in different directions are probably many. It could be internal politics. Sometimes, you take the example of the North of Ireland, sometimes they even end up in conflict with each other as well. That's certainly something that happens. But I think what's wrong in the framing is the idea that there is one block, and it's Hamas, and that's who Israel's fighting, because actually there's a plurality of groups operating according to their own aims, and there are substantial ideological differences in many cases between them.
And why didn't Israel defeat Hamas, or why didn't Israel defeat the Hamas-led Palestinian armed resistance? Why didn't they learn the lessons from, for instance, American Vietnam? They failed against an insurgent campaign. Britain in the north of Ireland, they failed against an insurgent campaign.
Yeah, it's a notoriously difficult thing to win a war like this where people can merge into the population. In many cases, they have the support of parts of the population. And it's very difficult to kind of, because you end up kind of swinging at nothing. They're not fighting on the same terms. It's not like army on army like we see in Ukraine and Russia. And they're notoriously difficult to kind of pin down the enemy and kill them. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a much more complicated type of warfare. But insurgencies are notoriously hard to win against a committed opponent who won't go toe-to-toe with a standing army, even an army which is as well funded and powerful. And you could argue as used to, has been fighting counterinsurgency for so long, so-called, as the IDF. But clearly, despite 17 months, I'm going to say, of bombing and ground invasion, there are armed groups which are intact and functioning to the degree where they can organise and hold spectacles like this quite openly.
And I think what these videos really show is that Israel didn't complete its war aims. It didn't eliminate Hamas. You know, the Israel-Hamas war narrative is debunked by showing just the plethora of groups that are there. And a lot of this you won't see on the mainstream media. I haven't seen analysis like we've got from Joe today on many of the mainstream channels. That's why please support Declassified, subscribe to our YouTube, leave a comment under this video, like the video. If you click on the super thanks button below, you can send us a donation. Journalism like this isn't cheap. So thanks for watching and join us for the next video.